Millions of Catholics across the world are grieving the death of Pope Francis, who passed away from a stroke and heart failure. We begin this evening with the sorrowful news of Pope Francis's passing, the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church and shepherd to 1.3 billion faithful around the world. Al Casi del Padre, Pope Francis has died, and just moments ago the Vatican released an official announcement stating that the 88-year-old Bishop of Rome has returned to the Father in heaven. When Pope Francis made comments about the LGBTQ+ community, his remarks sparked a strong backlash from believers around the globe, including criticism from inside the Vatican itself. What's your opinion on Pope Francis's approach to the LGBTQ+ community? If you have friends or family who belong to this community, comment 1. If not, comment 0. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos about the Church and the Catholic world. When Pope Francis made comments about the LGBTQ+ community, his remarks sparked a strong backlash from believers around the globe, including criticism from inside the Vatican itself. What's your opinion on Pope Francis's approach to the LGBTQ+ community? If you have friends or family who belong to this community, comment 1. If not, comment 0. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos about the Church and the Catholic world. So, what were the circumstances surrounding the death of Pope Francis on April 21, 2025? In the final chapter of his life, his ongoing health problems ultimately led to his passing. At the start of 2025, his health began to noticeably worsen. In February, he was diagnosed with bronchitis, but his condition quickly progressed into a serious respiratory crisis. On February 14, 2025, Pope Francis was admitted to Jolly Hospital in Rome with what were initially thought to be minor respiratory symptoms, but it was later confirmed that he was suffering from double pneumonia. His thoughts on vocation and the issues facing the modern world revealed his broad vision for the Church and the challenges it would encounter in the future. As Easter 2025 drew near, an important question emerged. Would Pope Francis be able to take part in the Church's major ceremonies? Although his declining health kept him from leading the Easter Sunday Mass, on April 20, 2025, Easter Sunday, he still appeared before thousands of faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square. Despite sitting in a wheelchair and struggling to breathe, he made the effort to bless the crowd and offered a short Easter message. In a powerful moment, Pope Francis recalls receiving a large white box from Pope Benedict XVI during their 2013 meeting at Castel Gandolfo. This meeting happened just after Benedict's resignation, an historic moment not seen in nearly 600 years. But what made this white box so important? According to Pope Francis, the box contained documents that exposed the most difficult and painful issues the Catholic Church was dealing with. These weren't just ordinary files. They were believed to detail cases of abuse, corruption, secret dealings, and misconduct taking place at the very core of the Vatican. Can you imagine the burden of receiving such knowledge on your very first day of a papacy that would span 12 years? It's said that Pope Benedict XVI told Francis, "I've gone this far, taken these actions, removed these people. Now it's your turn." This revelation has fueled intense speculation about the depth of the systemic problems inside the Vatican. From the clergy sex abuse crises to the financial scandals Pope Francis inherited, critics have faulted him for not being more specific when discussing these documents, claiming it reflects a lack of transparency. That was his final public address, and the crowd responded with chants of "Viva il Papa," long live the Pope, not realizing that his farewell was drawing near. What followed was a deeply emotional moment. Pope Francis took a short ride in the Pope-mobile around St. Peter's Square, waving to the faithful in what would be his last public appearance. The gesture came as a surprise even to those closest to him, as no one expected he'd be able to make such a public showing given his fragile health. That same day, he also held a brief private meeting with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, where they exchanged Easter greetings. This isn't the first time a pope has made controversial statements, but it's clear this marks the start of a turbulent new chapter. Now, with Pope Francis's passing, he has left behind a letter, a message confirming what many had long suspected, a secret message hidden inside the white box. We all know that Pope Francis was known for challenging traditional values. Unlike many of his predecessors, he had an open mind and was always ready to advocate for alternative solutions to divisive issues. Could the Pope's final letter contain a controversial message? And why hasn't the Vatican released it yet? Let's explore this topic. But first, let's take a step back in time and revisit some of the most controversial statements made by Pope Francis. We begin with one of the most intriguing revelations shared by Pope Francis himself, the mysterious white box he received from his predecessor, Benedict XVI. In his upcoming autobiography, tentatively titled Sparer, translated as Hope, set to be released in 2025, Pope Francis reveals a shocking detail that has sent shockwaves through both the religious world and the general public. Meanwhile, supporters see this admission as proof of Pope Francis's dedication to reform and a continuation of Pope Benedict XVI's efforts to purify the Church. However, the revelation about the white box is just one part of a much larger puzzle surrounding Pope Francis and the controversies linked to him, from Argentina to the Vatican and ultimately to his hospital bed. Before becoming Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio faced scrutiny over his role in one of the darkest chapters of Argentina's history, the Dirty War, which lasted from 1976 to 1983. During this time, Argentina's military dictatorship was responsible for the disappearance of thousands of individuals labeled as political opponents. Bergoglio, who was the provincial superior of the Jesuit order in Argentina at the time, came under scrutiny. A photo published by Verbitsky showed Bergoglio administering Holy Communion to Videla, the leader of the military regime. Critics also highlight that Bergoglio did not intervene to protect two Jesuit priests, Orlando Yorio and Francisco Jalich, from the dictatorship. In 1976, these two priests were abducted and tortured by the military. They had been working with impoverished communities, an activity the regime often linked to left-wing movements. When Pope Francis became Pope in 2013, he inherited not only a secret white box, but also a church grappling with numerous serious crises, none more damaging than the global clergy sexual abuse scandal. The Catholic Church's sexual abuse crisis stands as one of the darkest chapters in its history and has been one of the greatest challenges to Pope Francis's leadership. He committed to showing zero tolerance in tackling this issue. Pope Francis met with surviving victims, created a special committee at the Vatican, and introduced new rules to hold bishops accountable. His approach to these cases has become one of the most closely watched aspects of his leadership. Pope Francis has made significant strides in addressing the abuse crisis, including the abolition of the papal secrecy policy in 2019. This policy had once enforced strict confidentiality on abuse cases. The decision was praised for enhancing transparency and encouraging cooperation with civil authorities. In addition, Pope Francis ordered the opening of the Vatican archives concerning the wartime actions of Pope Pius XIII, showing a readiness to address difficult historical issues. However, critics have pointed out inconsistencies in his approach. In 2018, Pope Francis initially defended Chilean Bishop Juan Barros, who was accused of covering up the abuses committed by Father Fernando Caradima. After the public and victims expressed outrage, the Pope apologized and authorized an investigation, which ultimately led to Bishop Barros's resignation. The revelation of the mysterious white box in 2025 has further complicated the public's view of how Pope Francis handled abuse cases. The most serious accusations suggest that Bergoglio may have secretly identified these priests to the military as dissenters, making them more susceptible to persecution. These allegations challenge the very core of what a religious leader should stand for, protecting those under their care. However, Bergoglio has consistently denied these claims, stating that he worked quietly behind the scenes to shield the priests and others from the brutality of the dictatorship. Some investigations, like the book Bergoglio's List by author Nello Cavo, published in 2013, support Pope Francis's version of events. The book highlights how he helped many people escape the regime's oppression. In his memoir, Hope, Pope Francis reflects on the painful years of Argentina's dirty war. He recounts personal actions, such as smuggling people past military checkpoints to safety, and wrestles with the moral question of why he survived when so many others did not. However, the lack of concrete evidence for both sides of the story continues to stir controversy. Critics of his actions during the dictatorship, which led to the disappearance of up to 30,000 people, continue to question his transparency. Some believe that the documents Pope Francis received from Benedict XVI could reveal unresolved issues that the Pope has yet to fully address. Pope Francis has publicly acknowledged the Church's failures in handling abuse cases, expressing that he feels responsible for all the crimes committed by certain priests. However, victim advocacy groups often criticize his approach, claiming that while his efforts have increased, they still fall short of fully addressing the magnitude of the crisis. Additionally, the widespread financial scandals surrounding the Vatican present major challenges for Pope Francis. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, has long faced accusations of involvement in money laundering and corruption even before Pope Francis took office. To tackle this issue, Francis initiated an ambitious financial reform, bringing in external auditors and removing officials suspected of misconduct. Prior to this, Pope Benedict XVI had dismissed Gotti Tedeschi, the president of the Vatican Bank, in 2012 due to poor management. Some sources suggest that Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, who served as Benedict's Secretary of State, hindered investigations into past financial transactions, making Pope Francis's reform efforts even more challenging. This hospitalization lasted 38 days, marking the longest stay of his 12-year papacy. During this time, Pope Francis faced critical health crises that brought him to the brink of death. He suffered 4 severe episodes of breathing difficulties, the most dangerous of which occurred on February 28th, when he aspirated vomit, creating a life-threatening situation. His medical team faced a difficult ethical dilemma, whether to continue intensive treatment or allow him to pass peacefully. Reports indicate that it was his nurses who urged the doctors to do everything they could, knowing that Francis was determined to keep fighting for his life. This decision gave Pope Francis a few precious months to continue his mission. After being discharged on March 23, 2025, doctors advised him to rest completely for at least 2 months. They also recommended limiting public appearances and avoiding crowds to aid his recovery. However, those who knew Francis well understood that completely stepping back from public life was in direct contrast to his strong belief in his pastoral role. During this period of declining health, Pope Francis delivered several important messages that highlighted his priorities and concerns for both the Church and the world. On March 6, 2025, he released his first audio message since being hospitalized. The brief 30-word message, recorded in Spanish from Jamley Hospital, conveyed his heartfelt gratitude for the prayers of the faithful. He said, "I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your prayers for my health from the square. I will accompany you from here. May God bless you, and may the Virgin Mary protect you. Thank you." Though his voice was weak, this message carried deep meaning, showing his bond with the faithful even while resting in his hospital bed. On March 14, 2025, Pope Francis wrote a heartfelt letter to Luciano Fontana, the editor-in-chief of the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera. In the letter, he reflected on the fragility of humanity, writing, "The fragility of human beings has the power to make us more aware of what exists and what passes away, what gives life and what kills." He also called for global peace and disarmament, stating, "We must disarm speech, disarm the mind, and disarm weapons on earth." This message, written from his hospital bed, highlighted Pope Francis's ongoing commitment to peace, even as he faced the reality of his own mortality. Despite his declining health, Pope Francis remained deeply concerned about the future of the Church. On March 19, 2025, he issued a message for the 62nd World Day of Prayer for Vocations, which was scheduled for May 11, 2025, a day he would not live to see. In his message, he addressed the challenges young people face in the modern world, including job insecurity, identity crises, and the overwhelming messages that dominate the digital age. He encouraged young people to see their vocation as a journey of love and service, a call to dedicate themselves and make sacrifices. Pope Francis spent the final months of his life reflecting on Christian hope and the practice of discernment through prayer. He stressed that Christian hope is certain, not rooted in worldly things, but in a deep faith in God. In a world filled with chaos and haste, he encouraged the faithful to make time for prayer and reflection, describing it as the antidote to rash decisions. With a strong focus on vocation, especially in the later stages of his life, Francis not only reflected on his own journey, but also on the future of the Church. Even as his life neared its end, he remained deeply concerned with nurturing the next generation of leaders and the faithful. Although the details of the meeting remain mostly private, it was considered one of the Pope's final acts of diplomacy. On April 21, 2025, Easter Monday, Pope Francis passed away at 7:35 a.m. at his residence in Casa Santa Marta, where he had lived throughout his papacy. He chose to stay there because he preferred its simplicity over the traditional papal apartments. The Vatican announced his passing in a statement delivered by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who was overseeing church affairs during the period of papal transition. In his announcement, Cardinal Farrell did more than just report the Pope's death. He expressed deep sorrow and profound respect for him. Instead of being buried in the papal tombs beneath St. Peter's Basilica like many of his predecessors, Pope Francis requested to be laid to rest at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, outside the Vatican walls. This decision reflected his deep devotion to the Virgin Mary and the humility that characterized his life. Following the announcement of his passing, world leaders and religious figures quickly paid tribute to Pope Francis's legacy. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni described him as a great man and a great shepherd, highlighting his teachings on friendship and gentleness. French President Emmanuel Macron praised Pope Francis for his focus on the poor and his deep connection to nature. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, expressed personal sorrow, describing the Pope as a friend who worked tirelessly for Christian unity. European Parliament President Roberta Metsola honored his legacy of compassion and social justice, noting that his leadership transcended religious boundaries, showing respect and understanding for all faiths and communities worldwide. Pope Francis's legacy will be remembered not only for his teachings on love, humility, and justice, but also for his tangible efforts in reforming the Church and promoting peace, dialogue, and unity among religions and cultures. On Palm Sunday, just 1 week before his passing, Pope Francis delivered a deeply moving and inspirational message, emphasizing compassion and a focus on global suffering. In a time of growing crisis, he urgently called on Christians to carry one another's crosses, not to concentrate solely on their own burdens, but to share in the pain and hardship of others, particularly those who are suffering and marginalized. The death of Pope Francis marks the end of an era and raises important questions about the future of the Church amid the complex challenges he faced throughout his papacy. His passing on the morning of April 21, 2025, leaves a profound void in the heart of both the Catholic Church and the world. With humility and boundless compassion, he devoted his life to serving God and the Church, urging people to live by the values of the gospel, particularly mercy toward the poor and the most marginalized in society. His death not only marks the end of a papal reign, but also ushers in a new and challenging chapter for the Catholic Church. In accordance with ancient tradition, funeral rites were immediately carried out, including the sealing of his residence at Casa Santa Marta and the destruction of the Fisherman's Ring, the lead seal used by the Pope to prevent any misuse after his passing. Official funeral ceremonies will take place in St. Peter's Square in the coming days. Notably, in his final will, Pope Francis expressed his desire to be buried at St. Peter's Basilica. If you've been touched by the life and legacy of Pope Francis, leave a comment in remembrance, share this video, and hit the like button to help spread the message of love, justice, and mercy that he embodied so fully. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey of reflection and honor the timeless values he left behind. The civil war in Sudan, now entering its second year, became a powerful symbol in Pope Francis's message, serving as a stark reminder of human suffering that demands collective action and solidarity. His call was not just a lesson in faith, but an invitation to concrete action, flowing from a heart full of compassion, just as Jesus did when he shared in the suffering and lifted up the wounded. When he said, "The passion of Jesus becomes compassion whenever we reach out to those who feel they can no longer go on." It was more than a call to faith. It was a powerful appeal for empathy and care for the vulnerable and those in pain. The upcoming transfer of power will mark a pivotal moment, shaping the future direction of the Church in the years to come, and will undoubtedly carry the weight of the significant responsibilities Pope Francis leaves behind. Pope Francis has left behind a complex and profound legacy, partly due to the progressive reforms he introduced during his 12 years leading the Catholic Church. However, his legacy is not without controversy, particularly in the context of a church still divided between conservative and progressive factions. One notable aspect is the dominance of those appointed by Pope Francis, who have the potential to continue his policies and further his reforms. While resistance from conservative groups remains a significant factor in the internal dynamics of the Church, this was clearly reflected in Pope Francis's 2024 restructuring of funeral rites for popes, which were simplified compared to those of his predecessors. Notably, his decision about his burial place also reflected his deep personal and religious values. Rather than being buried in the papal tombs beneath St. Peter's Basilica, where previous popes were interred, Pope Francis requested to be laid to rest at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, a place closely tied to his devotion to the Virgin Mary, symbolizing the humility that defined his entire life. Known as the first Latin American pope and the first Jesuit pope, Francis brought a fresh perspective to the Church, focusing particularly on the values of mercy and advocating for the protection of the poor, migrants, and the environment. One of his most notable contributions was the Laudato Si encyclical, where he addressed climate change as a global moral issue, promoting a vision of environmental protection that is both scientific and rooted in moral and religious values. Furthermore, Pope Francis made significant progress in making the Church more inclusive, especially in its approach to same-sex relationships. This message also deeply reflected the way Pope Francis lived his life. He was not only a spiritual leader, but also someone who consistently stood alongside the poor, the oppressed, and the forgotten communities of society. His teachings continued to resonate in the final weeks of his life, leaving a profound impact on the legacy he left behind for both the Catholic Church and the world. In early April 2025, even as his health declined, Pope Francis remained resolute in defending his position on critical issues, such as the right to life. He condemned abortion, a deeply controversial issue in modern society, and reaffirmed the sanctity of human life, a stance he consistently upheld throughout his papacy. Yet, much like his life, Pope Francis's death has been surrounded by speculation and conspiracy theories. Following his passing, and in accordance with Vatican tradition, a conclave will be convened within 15 to 20 days to elect the next pope. This is particularly significant, as 80% of the cardinal electors were appointed by Pope Francis himself. This not only makes the papal election more significant, but also reflects how he shaped the future of the Church. During this time, preliminary meetings, known as general congregations, will discuss the state of the Church and the qualities the next pope must possess to carry on Pope Francis's legacy. These gatherings will give cardinals from around the world the chance to reach a consensus on the Church's next direction in an increasingly challenging world. Pope Francis's legacy will live on, not only through his teachings, but also through the tangible changes he brought to the Catholic Church and the broader world. His famous words, "Who am I to judge?" became a symbol of the Church's evolving stance on homosexuality and other moral issues. This shift reflects one of the central tenets of Pope Francis's papacy: the desire to create a church that is more inclusive and compassionate, especially toward those marginalized by society. One of the most significant changes Pope Francis implemented was in relation to the death penalty. While the Catholic Church historically accepted the death penalty in extremely rare cases, Pope Francis declared it unacceptable, stating that it violates human dignity. This marked an unprecedented and progressive stance for the Church. Pope Francis faced significant challenges during his papacy. One was his initial defense of Bishop Juan Barros in the 2018 Chilean abuse scandal, which led to criticism. He later apologized and accepted Barros's resignation. Another challenge was financial reform in the Vatican, where despite efforts for greater transparency, corruption and mismanagement persisted. These issues have shaped his legacy, highlighting both his commitment to change and the ongoing struggles within the Church. These conspiracy theories surrounding Pope Francis's papacy, including the idea that his election was illegitimate or that he is connected to the St. Malachi prophecy, have been widely debunked. Despite some fringe groups propagating these theories, they lack credible evidence and are not supported by official church doctrine or statements. Pope Benedict XVI consistently affirmed the legitimacy of Francis's papacy, and there has been no indication from the Vatican or reliable sources that any irregularities occurred during the conclave that elected him. These theories, including the claims that Pope Francis is a puppet of international powers or that his papacy is linked to apocalyptic prophecies, are rooted in misinformation and a distortion of facts. Despite their appeal to certain groups, there is no credible evidence to support such ideas. Prophecies like those attributed to St. Malachi are often interpreted with great flexibility to fit ongoing events, but they have no official basis in church doctrine. Similarly, the notion that Pope Francis is controlled by political or financial forces, such as the CIA or George Soros, reflects broader conspiracy thinking that often misrepresents the Pope's actions and beliefs. These narratives are distractions from the true focus of his papacy, advocating for mercy, justice, and reform within the Church. These conspiracy theories about Pope Francis's hospitalization and death are fueled by misinformation and a misunderstanding of how the Vatican operates. The papal conclave, as a deeply sacred and private process, involves cardinals from diverse backgrounds and regions, making it virtually impossible for external forces to orchestrate the selection of the Pope. Similarly, during Pope Francis's hospitalization in 2025, the Vatican maintained transparency about his condition, but this didn't prevent the spread of false claims about his health. These rumors, which suggested that the Vatican had concealed his death or manipulated public information, lacked credible evidence and were quickly debunked by official Vatican statements. The true focus should remain on the Pope's legacy and the impact of his leadership, not on baseless conspiracy theories. Absolutely. Pope Francis's legacy will endure in many ways. from the reforms he initiated to the cultural shift he brought within the Church. His focus on financial transparency, environmental protection through Laudato Si, and his unwavering stance on social justice for the poor and marginalized will continue to guide the direction of the Catholic Church for years to come. Despite facing resistance, his progressive outlook has had a lasting impact not only on the Church's internal structures, but also on its external relations with the wider world. His legacy will continue to shape discussions about the role of the Church in modern society and its moral responsibilities to global issues. Pope Francis has been targeted by conspiracy theories, including the claim that he is a counter-pope meant to replace Benedict XVI. These theories suggest Benedict was forced to resign for political reasons, despite his own statements that the resignation was voluntary. Such theories often arise from discomfort with Francis's reforms and progressive stance, but there is no credible evidence to support them, highlighting how misinformation can distort public perception. Pope Francis consistently criticized unchecked capitalism, advocating for economic justice and the protection of the poor, migrants, and refugees. His stance reshaped the Church's mission, emphasizing social justice over free market ideals, although not everyone agreed with his views. With his passing, questions arise about whether his reforms will continue or whether the Church will shift in a new direction, as it enters a transitional phase. Pope Francis's key achievements, like financial reforms and addressing clergy sexual abuse, will need to be carried forward, and the cardinals he appointed will play a crucial role in the Church's future. His reforms on power and governance, such as decentralizing authority to local bishops, marked a shift from the traditional Vatican structure. This vision aimed to make the Church more engaged with the world and responsive to people's needs. While this approach has been praised, it has also raised concerns among critics who worry that too much flexibility could dilute doctrinal values. Such claims are unfounded and overlook the wealth of public evidence, including official Vatican statements and verified media reports on Pope Francis's health. Even during his illness, details about his condition were openly shared and corroborated by credible sources. This situation underscores a troubling aspect of the information age, where conspiracy theories can flourish amidst uncertainty, especially regarding significant events. Ultimately, these theories are baseless and lack transparency, illustrating the challenge of separating fact from fiction in a world flooded with information. Indeed, the transparency provided by the Vatican, along with credible reports on Pope Francis's treatment and hospital stay, has effectively debunked most conspiracy theories surrounding him. Despite the allure of these theories for some, they pale in comparison to the verifiable facts presented by the Church and reputable sources. Pope Francis's influence has been profound, especially through his progressive stances on social issues. His famous quote, "Who am I to judge?" symbolized a notable shift in the Church's approach to topics like homosexuality, illustrating his commitment to inclusivity, compassion, and human rights. This perspective has not only reshaped the Church's social teachings, but also expanded its role in advocating for dignity and equality in the wider world. Pope Francis's approach to sexuality, while staying rooted in traditional Catholic teachings, was marked by a profound emphasis on compassion and understanding, shifting how many people view the Church's stance on such issues. His environmental encyclical Laudato Si was a groundbreaking document that not only inspired the Catholic community, but also had a global impact. By linking ecological concerns with moral responsibility, Pope Francis helped to reframe the care for creation as central to Catholic identity. His call for environmental stewardship sparked broader discussions on climate change and helped position the Church as an advocate in global initiatives like the Paris Climate Accord, highlighting the moral imperative to protect our planet. Pope Francis's legacy will undoubtedly have a lasting impact on the Catholic Church, and how his successor continues or adjusts his reforms will shape the future direction of the Church. Whether his reforms should be maintained or changed is a question that will depend on the perspectives of the cardinals and the faithful. This is a pivotal moment for the Church, and the next leader will need to balance tradition with the evolving needs of the global community. If you believe his reforms should continue, comment with the number 1. If you think a change in direction is necessary, comment with the number 0.